A millionaire marries an obese woman for a bet and discovers a secret that changes everything. The reflection in the mirror of the private elevator at the Bank of America Plaza in Atlanta didn't lie. Marcus Sterling was the embodiment of American corporate success. His tailored Armani suit and the white gold Rolex on his wrist were just the surface of a fortune built on ruthless decisions and a total lack of scruples. $5 million? Marcus arched an eyebrow, swirling the glass of 30-year-old whiskey in his hands. "Do you really think I can't make a plus-size woman fall in love with me, Harrison?" Harrison Brooks, his childhood friend and now business rival, smiled mischievously from across the table at the exclusive Capitol Grill. The two men occupied a private room overlooking the city, where they used to close their most important deals and their most indecent bets. "Not just any plus-size woman, Marcus. I'm talking specifically about Abigail Foster, the librarian at the Atlanta Public Library." Harrison slid a photo across the mahogany desk. "She's worked there for 5 years, lives alone, and as far as I know, hasn't had a date in over 2 years." Marcus examined the photograph with clinical interest. Abigail had wavy brown hair that framed a round face, piercing green eyes, and a genuine smile. She was dressed conservatively, as expected of a librarian, but there was something in her gaze that intrigued him, a spark of intelligence that didn't match the simplicity of her profession. "The rules are simple," Harrison continued, sipping his own whiskey. "You have to make her fall in love with you, marry her, and keep the marriage going for a whole year. If you succeed, the $5 million is yours. If you fail or give up, you pay me the same amount." "And why this particular woman?" Marcus asked, his curiosity genuinely aroused. Harrison shrugged. "Let's just say I want to see if you still have any humanity left under that Wall Street shock facade. Besides, it would be refreshing to see the great Marcus Sterling have to work hard to win over someone who isn't impressed by his money or status." The challenge was on, and Marcus Sterling never turned down a challenge. The next morning, he already had a plan in place. His personal assistant had compiled a complete dossier on Abigail Foster. Her hours at the library, her favorite places for lunch, even the coffee she ordered every morning at the small coffee shop near her work. What Marcus didn't know was that, while he was planning his approach, Abigail Foster was sitting in her modest apartment in the Midtown neighborhood, her fingers dancing over the keyboard of a powerful computer. On the screen, lines of code multiplied at an impressive speed. Next to her, a cup of tea was slowly cooling, forgotten in the midst of her concentration. "So he finally took the bait," she muttered to herself, an enigmatic smile playing on her lips as she read the email from her source inside Harrison's bag. "Showtime, Mr. Sterling." The first meeting was meticulously orchestrated by Marcus. He accidentally bumped into her in the cafeteria, knocking his own coffee over himself, an old but effective trick. Abigail, as expected, offered to help, and Marcus took the opportunity to strike up a conversation. "I'm such a klutz before my first coffee," he laughed, perfectly playing the role of the charming but vulnerable executive. "Can I make it up to you by buying you a new one too?" Abigail hesitated for a moment, and Marcus saw something flash past her eyes so fast he almost missed it. Was it fun? Knowledge? But soon her face took on a shy expression that matched her librarian persona. "You don't have to really," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "But thank you for the offer." Marcus wasn't used to being turned down, and this only increased his interest in the challenge. Over the next few days, he started going to the library regularly, always finding excuses to ask Abigail for help. To his surprise, he discovered that she was incredibly well informed on an impressive range of subjects, from classical literature to modern economics. What Marcus didn't realize was that every interaction was being carefully documented by Abigail. At night, in her apartment transformed into a technology operations center, she would update an elaborate file on her suitor. Her real occupation as an independent software developer about to launch a revolutionary digital security application remained her best-kept secret. "You're playing it exactly as I expected, Marcus," she muttered to herself, reviewing the recordings from the library security cameras she had hacked. As predictable as a badly written algorithm. The dance went on for weeks. Marcus, convinced that he was in control, gradually increased his advances. Small gifts began to appear on Abigail's desk, rare books that she had casually mentioned, handmade chocolates, even a delicate vintage brooch that matched her conservative style. Abigail accepted each gift with a calculated mixture of surprise and reluctance, perfectly feeding Marcus' ego. He was certain that his strategy was working, without ever suspecting that his every move had been anticipated with the precision of a computer program. "She's starting to crack," Marcus reported to Harrison during one of their regular lunches. "A few more weeks and she'll be completely in love." Harrison watched his friend with a puzzled expression. "Don't underestimate people, Marcus. Sometimes those who seem the simplest are the ones with the most interesting cards up their sleeves." Marcus dismissed the warning with a wave of his hand, already savoring his imminent victory. Little did he know that he was about to discover that some games are much more complex than they seem at first glance, and that the price of arrogance can be much higher than $5 million. Abigail gazed at her computer screen as Marcus Sterling's data paraded before her eyes. Financial reports, suspicious transactions, and compromising emails. His life was exposed in gigabytes of information that she had meticulously collected over the last few months. "You rich men always underestimate the wrong people," she muttered, taking a sip of her jasmine tea while her data analysis program processed more information about her unwanted suitor. The next day at the library, Marcus showed up punctually at 10:30 a.m., a time he thought was casual, but which Abigail knew was calculated to coincide with his break. She watched as he pretended to look for books in the economic history section, his $5,000 Italian suit standing out from the modest surroundings of the public library. "Miss Foster," he called out, his voice modulated to sound simultaneously professional and charming. "Could you help me find something about the Great Depression?" Abigail suppressed a wry smile. If he only knew that she had developed an algorithm that predicted exactly when and on what subject he would ask for help today. "Of course, Mr. Sterling. This way, please." As they walked between the shelves, Abigail noticed Harrison Brooks watching discreetly from one of the public computers. He was smarter than Marcus, but not smart enough to realize that his own electronic communications were also being monitored. "You know," Marcus began, as Abigail selected some books, "there's an excellent Italian restaurant that recently opened in Buckhead. Maybe you'd like to have dinner with me tonight?" Abigail hesitated for exactly as long as her role demanded. I don't know if it would be appropriate, Mr. Sterling. Please call me Marcus," he insisted, leaning slightly towards her. "And I promise it will only be a friendly dinner." In her apartment, hours later, Abigail prepared for dinner with surgical precision. Every element of her appearance had been carefully chosen to reinforce Marcus' image of her. A discreet flowery dress, soft makeup, modest jewelry. Her real arsenal, a modified smartphone with her own spy software, was hidden in her apparently old-fashioned handbag. Del Frisco's grill glowed against the Atlanta night sky when Marcus greeted her at the entrance. He had chosen a private table overlooking the city, clearly trying to impress her with his influence. "You look lovely tonight," he commented, pulling out the chair for her with rehearsed gallantry. During dinner, Abigail masterfully executed her own performance. She let slip little comments about her loneliness, her insecurities about her weight, her desire to find someone who valued her. Each word was a carefully laid bait, and Marcus bit into every one of them. "You know, Abigail," he said, after his second glass of wine, "you're different from the other women I usually meet. There's an authenticity about you that's refreshing." She lowered her eyes, feigning shyness, while her secret app recorded every word of the conversation. "You're very kind, Marcus, but I'm sure a person of your social standing must meet much more sophisticated women." "Sophistication is overrated," he replied, gently touching her hand on the table. "Sometimes what we're looking for is right in front of us, in unexpected places." While Marcus was talking, Abigail was thinking about her real project, a revolutionary security software that detected and prevented financial fraud in real time. Ironically, it was while investigating Harrison Brooks' suspicious activities that she found out about the bet. Dinner continued, and Marcus gradually increased his charm. He told stories of his business conquests, carefully edited to sound more heroic than predatory. Abigail reacted at the right moments, showing admiration and interest, while her program continued to collect data. At the end of the night, when Marcus dropped her off at home, he tried to kiss her. Abigail turned her face away at the last moment, allowing him only a kiss on the cheek. Good evening, Marcus. Thank you for a lovely dinner. Alone in her apartment, Abigail finally allowed her true smile to emerge. She connected her smartphone to her main computer and began analyzing the data collected during dinner. The recordings revealed subtle changes in Marcus' tone of voice when he lied, patterns of behavior that would confirm her suspicions about his questionable dealings. Phase 1 complete, she muttered, typing notes into her digital diary. Now let's see how long it takes for him to propose the next date. The answer came quicker than she expected. At 11:47 p.m., her phone vibrated with a message from Marcus. Loved our evening. How about lunch tomorrow? Abigail smiled at the screen. In another window on her computer, the code for her security program continued to grow. Soon, very soon, Marcus Sterling would discover that he had chosen the wrong prey for his cruel game. The next morning, while preparing for another day's work in the library, Abigail received an encrypted email from her source inside Harrison's bank. The information confirmed her suspicions. Marcus was accelerating his plans, convinced that his strategy was working perfectly. Poor little rich boys, she whispered to herself, adjusting her thick framed glasses that hid a microscopic camera. You really believe you control the game? Marcus couldn't get Abigail out of his thoughts as he watched the city of Atlanta through the panoramic windows of his penthouse at the Waldorf Astoria. 3 weeks had passed since their first dinner, and he was convinced that his plan was progressing perfectly. What intrigued him, however, was how a simple librarian could hold such stimulating conversations on such diverse topics. "How's progress with our librarian?" Harrison asked during a video conference. His sardonic smile irritated Marcus more than usual. "Better than expected," Marcus replied, adjusting his Hermes tie. "She's surprisingly interesting." What Marcus didn't realize was that, at that very moment, Abigail was in her true element. In her apparently modest apartment, a monitor showed the conversation between the two friends in real time, hacked through a vulnerability she had discovered in the building's security system. Fascinating how they never consider checking the credentials of the people they underestimate, murmured Abigail, her fingers dancing over the keyboard as she finished yet another piece of software. The program, which she secretly called Nemesis, was almost ready for its big debut. That afternoon, Marcus decided to surprise Abigail in the library with a special invitation. He found her organizing books in the technology section, an irony that completely escaped his notice. "How about a weekend in Savannah?" he proposed, flashing 2 first-class tickets. "I know a wonderful historic hotel in the Riverfront district." Abigail pretended to hesitate, adjusting her glasses which discreetly photographed Marcus' every expression. "That's very generous of you, Marcus, but I don't know if it would be appropriate." "Please," he insisted, gently touching her arm. "I promise we'll have separate rooms. It's just a chance for us to get to know each other better, away from the hustle and bustle of Atlanta." While Abigail appeared to consider the proposal, her program was already going through Marcus' hotel reservations and financial records. She discovered that he had only booked 1 suite, typical of his smug arrogance. "All right," she finally agreed, blushing in a way that Marcus found adorable. "But on one condition. I want to meet your friends first. Perhaps we could have dinner with Harrison? You talk about him so much." The mention of Harrison made Marcus freeze momentarily, but he recovered quickly. "Sure, that would be great. How about tomorrow night?" Dinner was scheduled at St. Cecilia's, an elegant restaurant in Buckhead. What Marcus didn't know was that Abigail had hacked the reservation system to secure a specific table, one that was perfectly positioned under one of the security cameras she had already compromised. During dinner, Abigail orchestrated a masterful performance. She let slip comments that demonstrated astonishing knowledge of Harrison's recent investments, causing the two men to exchange nervous glances. "It's amazing how much you know about the financial market," Harrison commented, studying her more closely. "Oh, I read a lot," Abigail replied with a shy smile. "Working in a library has its advantages." After dinner, when Marcus took her home, he tried to kiss her again. This time, she allowed a brief kiss, calculated to leave him wanting more. In her apartment, however, her soft expression gave way to a determined smile as she reviewed the data collected during the night. "Phase 2 complete," she murmured, watching her program process the information. Nemesis had identified suspicious patterns in Marcus and Harrison's recent transactions, exactly the kind of activity its software was designed to detect. The next day, while preparing for the weekend in Savannah, Abigail finalized the last details of her plan. Her software was ready to be presented to important Silicon Valley investors, but first, she had a special lesson to teach Marcus Sterling. "Sometimes, Mr. Sterling," she said to herself as she packed her suitcase, carefully hiding her high-tech equipment among modest clothes. "True sophistication lies in knowing when you're being manipulated." The game was entering its most critical phase, and Abigail knew that the weekend in Savannah would be a turning point. Marcus Sterling was about to discover that there was much more at stake than a simple $5 million bet, and that his prey had much sharper claws than he could have imagined. The high-speed train glided smoothly along the tracks toward Savannah, while Abigail discreetly watched Marcus asleep in the seat next to her. His relaxed, sleeping face contrasted with the usual mask of self-confidence he wore, and for a brief moment, she glimpsed something almost vulnerable in his features. Taking advantage of the moment of privacy, Abigail opened her seemingly ordinary tablet, but equipped with customized modifications. A silent notification flashed on the screen. Her Nemesis program had detected suspicious movements in Marcus' offshore accounts. As she suspected, he was preparing a significant transfer probably related to the bet. "Sleeping like a baby," she murmured, taking a discreet photo that her software immediately analyzed for micro-expressions. If you only knew what was coming. The Perry Lane Hotel, with its mix of contemporary luxury and historic Southern charm, was exactly the kind of place Marcus would choose to impress. The Art Deco lobby emanated elegance, and the staff moved with the rehearsed grace characteristic of Southern hospitality. "Mr. Sterling, your suite is ready," the receptionist announced with a professional smile. "And Miss Foster's room is also ready, as requested." Marcus could barely disguise his surprise. Abigail had discreetly called the hotel the night before to secure her own room, thwarting his original plans. "You'll love the gardens here," Marcus recovered quickly, guiding her towards the elevators. "I thought we could take a historical tour of the city this afternoon." Abigail smiled sweetly, adjusting her glasses that continued to register every moment. "That would be lovely. Let me just freshen up a bit first." In her room, Abigail quickly set up a secure network and connected her devices. Their screens showed not only the hotel's security cameras, but also the real-time tracking of Marcus' cell phone and his communications. "So you're already bragging to Harrison," she observed, intercepting the messages between the two friends. Marcus was complaining about the separate room mishap, but assuring her that he was still in control of the situation. The tour of the historic city was an elaborate dance of approach and retreat. Marcus tried to create intimate moments among the tree-lined squares and antebellum mansions, while Abigail carefully dosed her responses, keeping him interested but never completely safe. Over dinner at the elegant The Grey, housed in a restored former bus station, Abigail began to implement the next phase of her plan. Between mouthfuls of prawns and grits, she let slip comments that suggested a deep knowledge of the tech world. "It's fascinating how technology is revolutionizing the financial sector," she commented casually, "especially in terms of security and fraud detection." Marcus almost choked on his bourbon. "Are you interested in financial technology?" "Oh, it's just a hobby," she smiled shyly. "I read a lot about it in the library. Sometimes I think I was born into the wrong profession." Back at the hotel, on the balcony of his suite overlooking the historic city, Marcus made his move. He approached Abigail as she admired the night lights, wrapping her in a hug from behind. "You're a box of surprises, Abigail," he murmured in her ear. "Every time I think I've understood you, you surprise me again." Abigail allowed herself to relax slightly in his arms, noticing how her heart raced at the closeness. For a disturbing moment, she felt a twinge of something that wasn't in her calculations, a genuine attraction that threatened to complicate her plans. "Marcus," she turned to face him, her voice soft but firm. "I need to be honest with you. There's something you should know." Before she could continue, Marcus' cell phone vibrated with an urgent notification from his bag. Abigail knew exactly what it was. Her program had identified and flagged one of Marcus' suspicious transactions as possible fraud. "I'm sorry," he turned away, frowning at the mobile screen. "I need to sort this out quickly." As Marcus walked away to make frantic calls, Abigail smiled discreetly. Her program was working perfectly, creating small problems that would soon turn into an avalanche of inconvenience for Marcus. Back in her room, she updated her notes. Subject shows signs of unplanned emotional attachment. Possible complication for final phase of plan. Need to reassess variables. The next morning, over breakfast on the hotel terrace, Abigail noticed a subtle change in Marcus' behavior. His gazes were longer, his attempts to impress her less calculated. It was as if the predator's mask was beginning to slip, revealing something more authentic underneath. "You know," he said, playing with his coffee cup, "I've never met anyone like you. There are times when I almost seem to forget who I am when I'm with you." The irony of the statement didn't escape Abigail. While Marcus thought he was performing an elaborate manipulation, it was he who was being transformed by the process. The question was this transformation genuine or just another layer of his game? As the weekend drew to a close, Abigail knew she was approaching the crucial moment in her plan. Her software was ready to be revealed to the world, and with it, all of Marcus and Harrison's questionable activities would come to light. But for the first time since she began her revenge, she felt a hesitation she hadn't foreseen in her calculations. On the train back to Atlanta, watching the Georgia landscape pass by the window, Abigail wondered if she had underestimated the power of the very game she had created. As her program continued to collect data and build its case against Marcus, her heart was beginning to wonder if the price of revenge wasn't higher than she had imagined. Back in Atlanta, Abigail found herself in a dilemma that her sophisticated algorithm had not foreseen. Sitting in her secret apartment in Midtown, she watched the multiple screens that monitored Marcus' activities, but her mind was disturbingly distracted by memories of the weekend in Savannah. "Focus on the goal," she muttered to herself, forcing her attention back to Nemesis, which was flashing with new alerts about Marcus' suspicious financial activities. The program had detected a series of complex transfers between offshore accounts, clearly intended to hide the origin of the funds for the bet. Her phone vibrated, and it was Marcus, inviting her to dinner at Bacchanalia. In the last few days, since his return from Savannah, he had stepped up his advances, but there was something different about his actions. Nemesis' analysis of their communications showed altered linguistic patterns, indicating what could be a genuine emotional change. "I'd love to," she replied, maintaining her shy librarian persona, while simultaneously hacking the restaurant's reservation system to secure the perfect table for her next move. In Marcus' office on the 45th floor of the Bank of America Plaza, a tense meeting was taking place with Harrison. "You're falling for her, aren't you?" Harrison teased, watching his friend with a mixture of amusement and concern. Marcus adjusted his tie, uncomfortable. "I'm just playing my part as planned." "No, you're different," Harrison insisted. What happened in Savannah? What Marcus couldn't admit, either to Harrison or to himself, was that Abigail had awakened something in him that went beyond the game. Her intelligence, which he had initially underestimated, intrigued him more and more. Conversations with her made him question decisions that had previously seemed perfectly justifiable. That night, at the Bacchanalia, Abigail executed the next phase of her plan. Wearing a navy blue dress that elegantly highlighted her curves, she arrived at precisely the moment her program had calculated as ideal. "You look stunning," Marcus said, genuinely impressed. During dinner, Abigail began to sow the seeds of her revelation. Between exquisitely prepared dishes and carefully selected glasses of wine, she let slip increasingly specific comments about financial technology and digital security. "It's fascinating how algorithms can detect patterns that escape the human eye," she commented, watching Marcus' reaction carefully, "especially in complex financial transactions." Marcus swallowed, his hand shaking slightly as he raised his wine glass. "You seem to know a lot about that for a librarian. Looks can be deceiving, can't they, Marcus?" She smiled enigmatically, "Just as bets can be more complicated than they seem." Marcus' face paled visibly. "What are you talking about?" Before she could answer, his cell phone rang with an urgent notification of yet another Nemesis trap, alerting him to irregularities in his accounts. Abigail watched with clinical interest as he tried to keep his composure, knowing that his program was gradually tightening its grip. "Trouble in paradise?" she asked innocently. Marcus forced a smile. Nothing important, just some work details. Dinner continued, but the dynamic had changed subtly. Marcus was more cautious, studying Abigail with a new gaze. In turn, she allowed her mask to slip slightly, letting glimpses of her true nature shine through. Back at her apartment, Marcus tried a more passionate kiss, and Abigail allowed it, partly to keep her cover, partly because, against her will, she was also being affected by her own trap. "There's something about you," he murmured against her lips. "Something I can't decipher." "Maybe it's because you're looking in the wrong place," she replied softly, pulling away. "Sometimes the truth is hidden in plain sight." That night, after Marcus left, Abigail worked late on her program. Nemesis was ready for its big moment. The presentation to Silicon Valley investors was scheduled for next week, but as she finalized the last details, her hands hesitated over the keyboard. "What am I doing?" she asked the glowing screen, where lines of code danced like digital constellations. The original plan had been to expose Marcus and Harrison, to use Nemesis to reveal their fraudulent transactions and the cruel bet. But now, for the first time, she wondered if there was another way. Her phone vibrated with a message from her source at Harrison's bank. "He's in love with you." That wasn't in the plan. Abigail closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her choices. The game she had created to teach a lesson was turning into something more complex, more dangerous not only for Marcus, but for her own heart. Marcus' office at the Bank of America Plaza was silent that Monday morning, except for the rhythmic sound of his fingers drumming on the mahogany desk. The latest notifications from the bank about irregularities in his accounts were making him increasingly uneasy. Something wasn't right, and for the first time in his life, Marcus Sterling felt like he was losing control. "Mr. Sterling," his assistant interrupted his thoughts through the intercom. "Miss Foster is here." Marcus straightened up in his chair, surprised. Abigail had never come to his office before. When she entered, there was something different about her posture, a subtle confidence that he had never noticed before. "We need to talk," she said, taking a seat opposite him without waiting for an invitation. Her glasses reflected the city lights outside, making it impossible to read her eyes. "Of course, Marcus began, but was interrupted by the sound of his computer issuing an alert. On the screen, several windows began to open by themselves, showing records of transactions that he recognized immediately, including those related to the bet with Harrison. "Interesting how patterns emerge when you know where to look," Abigail commented casually, taking a tablet out of her bag. With a few taps, more information began to appear on Marcus' screen. "How do you?" he paled, finally understanding. "Who are you really?" An enigmatic smile appeared on Abigail's lips as she removed her glasses. "Let me introduce you to Nemesis, Mr. Sterling. It's a financial fraud detection program I've been developing for the past 3 years. You and Harrison have been my unofficial test cases." Marcus felt his blood run cold in his veins. His entire empire, built on questionable transactions and market manipulations, was on display in front of him. But more than that, his heart was being crushed by the realization that the woman he was genuinely falling in love with had been playing his own game all along. "Why?" was all he managed to ask. "Originally, to prove that my software worked," Abigail replied, leaning forward. "But something changed along the way, didn't it? Something neither of us planned." At that moment, Harrison burst through the office door, his face red with anger. "Marcus, all our accounts are—" He stopped at the sight of Abigail, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You, Mr. Brooks," Abigail greeted calmly. "How convenient. Now I can explain to both of you at the same time." Over the next 30 minutes, Abigail detailed how she had found out about the bet, how she had used it as an opportunity to test her software, and how she had monitored their every move. Nemesis had identified and documented dozens of suspicious transactions, insider trading schemes, and market manipulations. "Tomorrow, I'm presenting Nemesis to Silicon Valley investors," she revealed. "The question is, do you want to be the villains of the story or part of the solution?" Marcus looked out of the window, watching Atlanta stretch out below them. His whole world was falling apart, but strangely, he felt more alive than ever. "Did you really plan all this?" "Not everything," Abigail admitted, her voice softening. "I didn't plan to care about you. I didn't plan to look beyond the financial predator to find someone capable of change. Harrison watched the interaction between the two with growing understanding. So that's it? Blackmail? I prefer to call it an opportunity for redemption, Abigail corrected. Nemesis doesn't have to be just a tool for exposure. It can be a prevention system, helping financial institutions to identify and prevent fraud before it happens. With your knowledge of the market, you want our help? Marcus asked, incredulous. I want partners who understand both the technical and the human side of the problem, she explained. And maybe you want to give a chance to something that started out as a lie, but turned into something real. The silence that followed was heavy with possibilities. Marcus looked at the screens showing his past transactions, then at Abigail. She had taken his world apart piece by piece, but in doing so, had shown him a different path. What if I say yes? He finally asked. To everything? Then we start again, Abigail replied, holding out her hand. This time no bets, no games, just the truth. Harrison watched the scene unfold with a mixture of admiration and resignation. You're brilliant, you know that? Scary, but brilliant. Come to the presentation tomorrow, Abigail invited them both. See what we can build together, instead of tearing each other down. When she left the office, Marcus remained motionless for several minutes, absorbing everything that had happened. His phone vibrated with a message from her. Dinner tonight? No masks this time. For the first time in his life, Marcus Sterling smiled not because he had won, but because he had lost and in that defeat, found something much more valuable than money or power. He replied, yes. It's time to meet the real Abigail Foster. Nemesis' presentation at the technology conference in Silicon Valley was scheduled to begin in exactly 1 hour, and Abigail watched the audience form through the curtains of the main stage at the San Francisco Convention Center. Executives from major banks, venture capitalists, and specialized journalists filled the auditorium, all eager to learn about what rumors described as a revolution in financial security. Marcus and Harrison sat in the front row, their impeccable suits contrasting with the more casual style of Silicon Valley. The tension between them was palpable, even from a distance. The decision to attend the presentation had been a turning point for both of them, especially for Marcus, who had spent the previous evening reviewing every aspect of his life. 3 minutes, Miss Foster, whispered one of the event organizers. Abigail adjusted her navy blue blazer over an elegant dress that bore no resemblance to her old librarian clothes. Her personalized tablet contained not only the Nemesis presentation, but also enough evidence to destroy dozens of careers in the financial market, including those of Marcus and Harrison. Ladies and gentlemen, the presenter's voice echoed over the sound system. Please welcome Abigail Foster, CEO of Nemesis Technologies. As Abigail took to the stage, Marcus felt his heart race. This was a completely different woman from the shy librarian he had known. Her movements were precise and confident, her presence magnetic as she took center stage. The financial market has always been a game of cat and mouse, she began, her voice clear and firm. Fraudsters develop ever more sophisticated schemes, while regulators struggle to keep up. Today that changes. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in technology and behavioral psychology. Abigail demonstrated how Nemesis not only detected suspicious patterns in financial transactions, but also analyzed human behavior, identifying subtle signs of manipulation and fraud even before the transactions took place. To demonstrate the system's effectiveness, she continued, provoking a nervous look from Harrison, we analyzed months of data from various financial institutions. The results are interesting. Marcus held his breath, but Abigail didn't expose her specific transactions. Instead, she used anonymous data to illustrate how the system worked. It was a show of mercy he hadn't expected and wasn't sure he deserved. After the presentation, while the audience applauded enthusiastically, Abigail was surrounded by eager investors. Marcus watched from a distance, noticing how deftly she navigated between offers and technical questions. This was her true brilliant, strategic, unstoppable nature. She's got us there, Harrison murmured beside him. The question is, what do we do now? Before Marcus could answer, Abigail appeared before them, her eyes shining with a mixture of triumph and something more complex when they met Marcus. Gentlemen, she smiled, How about we discuss the future over dinner? Zone, one of San Francisco's most exclusive restaurants, served as the setting for one of the most surreal conversations of Marcus' life. Between elaborate dishes and expensive wines, they discussed a complete restructuring of their financial operations. Nemesis needs insiders who understand how fraudsters think, Abigail explained, swirling her wine glass. Who better than two former market predators to help improve the system? Are you offering us jobs? Harrison asked, incredulous. I'm offering redemption, she corrected, and a chance to use your talents for something positive. Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of the shy librarian he had known. Why give us this chance? After all? Abigail placed her cup on the table, her gaze fixed on Marcus. Because during our little game, I realized something. People can change when they find a strong enough motive. And sometimes that reason can be something, or someone completely unexpected. The silence that followed was full of unspoken possibilities. Harrison, sensing the tension between the two, discreetly excused himself to make a phone call. Have you really fallen in love? Abigail asked softly when they were alone. Or was it just part of the game? Marcus considered the question for a long moment. At first, it was just the game, but at some point, maybe in Savannah, maybe before, something changed. You changed something in me. Ironic, isn't it? She smiled. We both started out with plans to cheat on each other and ended up finding each other in the process. The city of San Francisco shone through the restaurant's windows, its lights reflecting off the wine glasses like fallen stars. Marcus realized that he was at a turning point not only for his career, but for his heart. If I accept your proposal, he began, if you really want to change, would we have a real chance? No games, no lies? Abigail reached across the table, lightly touching his hand. I think we're beyond games, Marcus. The question is, are you ready to be as vulnerable as I was when I decided to show my true self? At that moment, looking into the eyes of the woman who had deconstructed and rebuilt his world, Marcus Sterling made the most important decision of his life. And for the first time, it wasn't a decision based on financial gain or power. It was based on something much more valuable, the possibility of true love and redemption. The Atlanta headquarters of the newly formed Nemesis Technologies occupied 3 floors of a modern glass and steel building in the Buckhead district. 2 weeks after the presentation in San Francisco, Abigail watched her expanded team through the glass walls of her executive office. Marcus and Harrison had integrated surprisingly well into the technological culture she had established. The beta test reports are in, announced Marcus, entering her office without knocking an intimacy that now seemed natural between them. 5 major banks have already signed preliminary contracts. Abigail smiled, noticing how he had abandoned his silk ties in favor of more casual dress shirts. The transformation wasn't just external. His behavioral analyses showed significant changes in his decision-making patterns. And how is the implementation of the prevention module going? She asked, indicating the chair in front of her. Harrison is leading the testing team. Ironically, our knowledge of fraud is proving invaluable in strengthening the system. The moment was interrupted by an urgent notification on Abigail's computer. Her face instantly changed to an expression of concern that Marcus had already learned to recognize. What is it? Nemesis detected an interesting pattern, she replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. It seems that some of your former associates aren't happy about your change of sides. Marcus leaned over to look at the screen, where graphs and data pulsed red. Charles Montgomery, he muttered, recognizing the patterns. He's always been the most dangerous of the bunch. He's trying to access our servers, Abigail confirmed, her hands moving with surgical precision as she activated additional security protocols. And from what I can see, it's not just an attempt at industrial espionage. The air in the office was thick with tension. Charles Montgomery was known in the financial world as a ruthless predator, someone who didn't hesitate to destroy lives in order to achieve his goals. Marcus had worked with him on several occasions in the past, and the memories made him shudder. He knows too much about our old operations, Marcus admitted. If he gets access to our systems, he won't, Abigail interrupted, a determined glint in her eyes. Nemesis isn't just fraud detection software. It's my digital security masterpiece. Harrison burst into the office, his tablet showing the same alerts. Did you see that? Montgomery is mobilizing significant resources. He wants to destroy us before we can expose his operations. Abigail stood up, her posture emanating a calm that contrasted with the urgency of the situation. Assemble the team in the war room. It's time to show what Nemesis is really capable of. The war room was a high-tech space in the center of the office, with walls covered in screens and workstations equipped with the latest technology. Within minutes, Abigail's elite team of programmers was mobilized. Montgomery is using a network of ghost servers, Abigail explained, projecting complex diagrams onto the screens. He thinks he can attack us without leaving a trace, but every digital movement leaves a unique signature. Marcus watched in fascination as she coordinated the defense. This was Abigail in her natural element, not the shy librarian he had known, but a digital commander fighting a battle in multiple virtual dimensions. There, Harrison pointed to an anomaly in the data. He's trying to replicate our old market manipulation strategies. And that's exactly what's going to be his undoing, Abigail smiled, her fingers dancing over the keyboard. Nemesis not only detects these patterns, it can reverse them in real time. The next few hours were an intricate dance of digital attacks and counterattacks. Montgomery had assembled an impressive team of hackers, but they were no match for the system Abigail had developed over the years. Incredible, Marcus muttered, watching as she turned each attempted break-in into a trap to gather more evidence against Montgomery. Did you plan this from the start? Let's just say I've learned to always have a plan B, she replied without taking her eyes off the screens. An A, C, D, and E, if necessary. As the night progressed, the true genius of Nemesis was revealed. The system not only protected its own data, but used each attack as an opportunity to map Montgomery's criminal network. We have everything, Abigail finally announced, exhausted but triumphant. Every transaction, every offshore account, every connection to criminal organizations. Montgomery has just handed over his entire operation to us. Harrison whistled softly, examining the data. That'll take down half of Wall Street. Only the rotten half, Marcus corrected, a new conviction in his voice. Maybe that's exactly what the financial market needs, a thorough cleanup. Abigail leaned back in her chair, allowing herself to finally relax. The question is, are you really ready to be on the right side of history this time? Marcus approached her, taking her hand. By your side is the only place I want to be right now. The moment was interrupted by one last notification. The FBI had just received an anonymous package with all the evidence needed to dismantle Montgomery's organization. Well, gentlemen, Abigail smiled, standing up. I think we deserve a celebration. Dinner? As they left the office, Marcus realized that his life had changed irreversibly. The quest for power and money that once consumed him had been replaced by something much more valuable, the chance to make a difference, alongside someone who challenged him to be better. You know, he commented as they waited for the elevator, that bet was the best wrong decision I've ever made in my life. Sometimes, Abigail replied, entwining her fingers in his. The best codes come from the most interesting mistakes. The news of Charles Montgomery's failed attack on Nemesis Technologies spread quickly throughout the financial world. In just 1 week, shares in Abigail's company tripled in value, while Montgomery's empire crumbled under federal investigation. However, for Abigail and Marcus, the real challenges were just beginning. The investors are nervous, Marcus commented, entering Abigail's office with a stack of reports. They're afraid that more people from our past might try something similar. Abigail looked up from her computer, where she was analyzing possible vulnerabilities in the system. They should be more worried about what Nemesis might reveal about their own operations. The tension in the air was palpable. Over the last few weeks, their relationship had developed into something deep and complex, but also fragile. The transition from enemies to allies, and then to something more, had not been without its moments of doubt. I've received an interesting proposal, Marcus said, sitting down in the chair opposite her desk. The Department of Justice wants our help to implement a modified version of Nemesis in their financial surveillance system. And you're considering it? Abigail asked, studying his expression. I've been considering a lot of things lately, he replied, his gaze meeting hers. Like the fact that 6 months ago, I was exactly the kind of person our software was designed to catch. Harrison chose that moment to enter, loading his tablet with new analytics. You need to see this. Montgomery's pattern wasn't unique. We detected similar movements in at least 3 other large investment funds. Abigail stood up, walking over to the wall of screens that dominated her office. With a few quick commands, she projected a complex network of financial transactions. The system is evolving faster than we expected. It's learning from every attempted attack. It's scary, Marcus commented, moving closer to examine the data. But it's also beautiful. Like us, Abigail murmured, so low that only Marcus heard. The afternoon turned into evening as they worked, analyzing data and strengthening the system's defenses. The technical team had left hours ago, leaving just the 3 of them in the office illuminated by the computer screens. We need to make a decision about the Department of Justice, Harrison finally said, rubbing his tired eyes. If we accept, we'll essentially be becoming part of the system we use to exploit. Maybe that's exactly why we should accept, Marcus replied, his voice carrying a new determination. Who better to protect the system than those who know its flaws inside out? Abigail watched the interaction between the 2 former financial predators, amazed at their transformation. Nemesis had been designed to detect fraud, but it had ended up catalyzing something much deeper, a fundamental change in the character of people she had initially considered irreparable. There's something else you need to know, she announced, typing a series of commands into her terminal. A new screen lit up, showing even more complex code than the original Nemesis. What's that? Marcus asked, moving closer to examine the lines of programming. The real reason I started this project, Abigail replied, her voice soft but firm. My father was a small investor who lost everything in a scheme very similar to the ones you used to operate. He didn't survive the blow. The silence that followed his revelation was deafening. Marcus felt his heart squeeze, remembering how many lives he had affected in his quest for wealth and power. Nemesis wasn't created just to detect fraud, she continued. It was created to prevent tragedies like my father's, to give ordinary people a chance against financial market predators. Harrison dropped into a chair, the weight of the revelation evident in his expression. That's why you chose us? To prove that even people like us can change? I chose you because, despite everything, I saw something else in your behavioral patterns. Something that Nemesis detected before I even consciously realized it. Abigail smiled softly at Marcus. Especially in you. Marcus crossed the room in 3 long strides, taking Abigail's hands in his. I'm sorry about your father, and I'm sorry for all the lives I've damaged. But I promise that, from now on, every line of code we write, every decision we make, will be to fix what people like me have broken. We, Harrison corrected, standing up, people like us, and we're going to do it together. The moment was interrupted by a soft alert from the system. New suspicious patterns had been detected, more subtle and sophisticated than the previous ones. Looks like we've got some work to do, Abigail commented, turning her attention back to the screens. But before diving back into the code, she squeezed Marcus' hand lightly, a gesture that carried promises of future conversations and unexplored possibilities. The night progressed as they worked, 3 unlikely people united by a common purpose. Nemesis continued its silent vigil, evolving and learning, not only detecting financial patterns, but also witnessing the transformation of those who operated it. From the top of the building in Buckhead, the lights of Atlanta shone like earthly stars, reminding those of all the lives their decisions affected. And amid the soft hum of servers and the glow of computer screens, something new was being born. A partnership based not only on technology and redemption, but also on mutual understanding and, perhaps, love. The rising Atlanta sun painted the horizon in golden hues as Abigail finalized the last preparations for the most important presentation of her career. The auditorium of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta was packed with representatives from the Department of Justice, the SEC, and leaders of the country's major financial institutions. Ready? Marcus asked softly, adjusting the tie Abigail had chosen for him in navy blue with discrete geometric patterns that resembled lines of code. Almost, she replied, checking the data on her personalized tablet one last time. Nemesis had evolved significantly in recent months, turning into something far beyond her initial expectations. Harrison entered the backstage room, carrying 3 cups of coffee. The latest reports have just come in. The system identified and prevented fraud attempts in 98.7% of the test cases. It's practically perfect. Nothing's perfect, Abigail smiled, accepting her cup. But sometimes we find something that comes pretty close. Her gaze met Marcus, and they both smiled, sharing a moment of mutual understanding. Their journey from a cruel bet to a transformative partnership had proved that the biggest changes often come from the most unexpected places. Ladies and gentlemen, the Fed director's voice echoed through the sound system. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Abigail Foster, Marcus Sterling, and Harrison Brooks from Nemesis Technologies. When the 3 took to the stage, the contrast between their previous presentations was evident. There were no more masks or pretensions, just 3 professionals united by a common purpose of transforming the financial system. A year ago, Abigail began, her voice firm and clear. I was developing software to detect financial fraud. Today, we present something much bigger. A complete solution that not only identifies suspicious activity, but actively prevents exploitation of the financial system. The next 2 hours were dedicated to technical demonstrations and practical cases. Marcus and Harrison shared valuable insights into how financial predators operated, turning their previous knowledge into prevention tools. The real power of Nemesis, Marcus explained, is not just in its code, but in its ability to learn and adapt, just as people can change when they find the right motivation. The presentation was a resounding success. Contracts were signed, hands were shaken, and the future of Nemesis Technologies looked brighter than ever. But for Abigail, the most significant moment came afterwards, when she found Marcus alone in his office. I found this morning, he said, handing her an envelope. Inside was the original contract for the bet with Harrison, now cancelled and marked with a large void in red. Have you kept this all this time? She asked, touching the paper gently. As a reminder, Marcus replied, stepping closer, of the man I was and the man you helped me become. Abigail placed the contract on her desk, next to the portrait of her father that now occupied a place of honor. You know, when I started this project, I was looking for justice. Revenge, perhaps. I never imagined I'd find something much more valuable. And what did you find? Marcus asked, although his smile suggested that he already knew the answer. A second chance. Not just for me or you, but for the whole system. She paused, looking at the screens showing Nemesis in action, and something no algorithm could predict. True love. Harrison chose that moment to appear in the doorway, carrying a bottle of champagne. Sorry to interrupt, but I think we have something to celebrate. As the glasses were poured, Abigail watched the 2 men who had become an integral part of her life. Harrison, now the company's compliance director, had found his own redemption in protecting the system he had previously exploited. And Marcus? A toast, she proposed, raising her glass, to new beginnings. To the codes that unite us, Marcus added, his eyes fixed on hers. And to the bets that changed our lives, Harrison added with a smile. The sun was setting over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In the Nemesis Technologies office, 3 unlikely people had found not only professional success, but something much more precious, a chosen family, united by a common purpose. Later that evening, as they walked through Piedmont Park, Marcus held Abigail's hand. I have one last confession to make, he said, stopping by the lake. One more, she joked, but her heart raced when she saw his serious expression. That bet was the best defeat of my life, because it brought me to you. Abigail smiled, thinking about how algorithms and emotions sometimes intertwined in unexpected ways. Maybe some games are made to be lost. Or maybe, Marcus replied, pulling her closer, some games are just the beginning of a much bigger story. And there, under the starry Atlanta sky, as Nemesis continued its silent vigil over the financial world, 2 hearts that began as adversaries found their own perfect algorithm, a code of love, trust, and redemption that no software could hack.